Dear Richard, you are now here in Budapest, coming from Brooklyn, and with a very special view on the processes going on in Hungary these days. Generally, in North America, the picture about Hungary is not very positive. What's your idea about the processes in Hungary, the situation?
Well, let me say right off the bat, I'm absolutely thrilled about what's taking place in Hungary, especially in regard to the new constitution and its recovery and revitalization of Christian culture in Hungary as the basis of social unity, as opposed to a merely economic approach to social unity. And I can tell you that there are many, many Christians, especially Catholics, who are delighted with this change in Hungary and this new constitution that comes only roughly 25 years after communist oppression for more than 50 years. And if I may, I'd like to read something from a Catholic publication in America called The New Oxford Review. And this was put out in March 2013, and the name of or title of the article is A Faith Enshrined, A Nation Renewed. The author is Christopher Gawley, who is a corporate attorney in New York City, and he writes, "One might think that this small country has little left to offer the world. As it turns out, Hungary has a part to play, perhaps a great one, in the Christian revitalization of the world. Its most recent contribution is a remarkable new constitution that may very well prove to be a model for Christian countries everywhere."
It's amazing, yeah, from an attorney.
An attorney, New York attorney.
Yeah. And now just share a couple of things about your life. What's your everyday work and interest? And
Sure. So as I mentioned to you before the interview, my family is from Brooklyn, New York. I was raised in the suburbs. We moved out like so many people from New York City in the early 60s after a brief stay in Japan of 4 years. My father was an engineer for Pfizer, and he was the project manager in the building of a pharmaceutical plant in Kobe. We came back to the States, as I said, moved out to the suburbs on Long Island, and that's where I was raised. Afterwards, I went to university and received a degree in English literature, and then a master's degree in an eclectic program of literature and philosophy. I was raised an Episcopalian. The Episcopalian Church is the Anglican Church in America since the American Revolution. And I became a Catholic, or was received into the Catholic Church in 1983 by the Jesuits at St. Ignatius Loyola on Park Avenue in Manhattan. And about 15 years later, I started studying for the priesthood. I was in Rome for 4 years and did a bachelor's in theology, and then went back to philosophy for a licentiate, which is like a master's degree, followed by doctoral work. And I successfully defended my dissertation in 2000 at the Angelicum, the University of St. Thomas Aquinas in the city.
The topic was?
I did my dissertation on an American logician and philosopher, Willard Van Orman Quine, who is probably the 20th century's greatest philosopher of logic. And so the title of my dissertation was The Philosophy of W.V. Quine and the Metaphysics of Mathematical Logic.
Just a question in
Yes.
brackets. What did attract you from Episcopalian church to the Catholic Church?
Well, that's a very long question.
Cut it short.
Yeah, cut it short. Basically, I left Christianity as an adult. Once I was studying in university, I was dabbling in all sorts of modern philosophies, not the least of which the subversive philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche. But I got interested in Christianity again after university, and when I began to study the history of the church, I found myself thinking in terms of Cardinal Newman, the great convert from Anglicanism in the 19th century, who famously said to read history is no longer to be a Protestant. And he pointed out that if we condemn the popes of the 15th century, we might as well condemn them of the popes of the 4th and the 5th century. In other words, there was a continuous history of Christianity involving the development of doctrine, which of course Cardinal Newman is famous for, that showed me that the Catholic Church is really the apostolic church with roots in Scripture, so that if I were to become or return to Christianity, I wanted to return to the source, as it were.
Thank you. So returning to the main topic, because there is a paper here before me, the topic of a lecture, an abstract, and on the top of it is on the origin and end of liberalism, from Newtonian politics to the postmodern state. You are now in clerics. You are a Roman Catholic priest.
Yes. Oh, I forgot to mention that I was ordained to the priesthood in the year 2001.
And your opinion is your opinion.
Yes.
Now we are discussing, it's not the official Catholic teaching.
Correct.
Yeah.
I hope it is consistent with Catholic teaching, but I certainly, I'm not here, I'm representing my own opinion, to be sure.
Can you summarize just in a couple of sentences what your lecture is on?
Yes. The essential idea is that the modern age is in a bankrupt situation because it's caught between essentially two false socioeconomic theories, or better, ideologies. On the one hand, a capitalist model of society, and on the other hand, a socialist model of society. And most people, I think, confuse liberalism with the capitalist model, when in fact the socialist model and the capitalist model are simply two faces of liberalism. And what I consider a better or more true or more humanistic society would be one between the two, in effect, a society that I call a corporatist society, or perhaps it would be better to say a neo-corporatist society, which aligns itself between the two extremes in the spirit of in medio stat virtus, in the middle stands virtue.
You are speaking about the cultural aspect of liberalism.
Yes.
How do you see it? What are the fruits of a cultural liberalistic point of view?
Yes. Well, I think what liberalism really tries to undermine culture. Because culture sets limits on consumption and production. And liberalism, because liberalism is essentially is directed toward economics. Economics is the goal of human society rather than culture. And it's cultures and customs, social customs, systems of belief that put limits on consumption, and therefore culture has to be essentially marginalized. And one strategy of liberalism in order to marginalize culture is apparently or a specious stratagem of multiculturalism. And because multiculturalism essentially destroys the traditional cultural fabric of a country and makes culture secondary to economic life. And I see liberalism as, again, as a socio-economic theory primarily directed to economic life, and therefore forcing politics to be at the surface rather of economic activity. Yeah, for the sake of wealth. Wealth becomes the human end, which is opposed to both the Christian and classical notion of the human good. Wealth plays a role, but it's not the end of human life, the purpose of human life.
If you reflect on the situation of the cultural situation in the USA,
yeah,
in your home, concerning liberalism and the fruits and the tendencies,
yeah,
what can you share with us?
Yeah, well, this is, if you will, I don't want to get too sidetracked, obviously, on American foreign policy, but America is historically, at least since the 19th century, a very pluralistic society, and was never interested in maintaining a traditional culture. And that's because, again, in connection with my comments earlier, America is a classic Enlightenment liberal society, the land of economic opportunity. So it once had a Protestant culture. The culture of the founding fathers was very homogeneous. But America created a constitution that was intended to be value-free and procedural, so that America, culturally and otherwise, had an open future. And interestingly, there were many individuals who are not well known today called the Anti-Federalists, at the time, who were concerned about the lack of regard for religion in the American Constitution, and that America could lose its Christian character someday. And in fact, things have turned out as they expected. So now, I just would add to that that's why the American model of socioeconomic life is not appropriate for many other countries with deep and long cultural traditions. American foreign policy and Americans tend to think that everybody in the world would be happier if they were like American consumers or shoppers, and we have a hard time understanding the commitment to values and belief systems that are meta-economic, That's why we're so frustrated by what's going on in the Middle East, for example.
When you say that liberalism undermines culture, you mean that any kind of culture is undermined by liberalism? Is there anything else it brings with itself to replace something?
Well, it really is attempting, as I said, I think it uses multiculturalism and pluralism as a strategy to turn people away from their cultural commitments toward a robust, a more robust economic life, and interest in consumption and wealth, building up your pile of matter, as it were, rather than focusing on or giving due attention to one's spiritual life and cultural pursuits.
It means that what really matters is the economical life.
Yes, yes.
And the individual interests.
Yes. So in a nutshell, the middle position, which I'm calling corporatism, or perhaps better again, neo-corporatism, is the central axiom of a neo-corporatism would be that the market and economic life is a means, not an end. Whereas in the West, generally, the end of social life has become economics and economic activity, and politics is at the service of that economic activity, rather than the cultivation of manners and morals and virtue, creating, as I put in my summary, a decorous society, a society that is interested primarily in cultural beautification, if you will, both in terms of the soul and in terms of the appearance of living space. And when you're interested in a decorous society, you are interested in the spiritual life, the moral life of a people, and creating again beautiful living space, and not just a functional living space.
When I would like to return to the very fact that liberalism undermines culture.
Yeah.
How come that someone, a man of culture, a woman of culture, can be liberal if liberalism undermines culture?
Yeah, okay. Well, let me give you an example from my youth. Around 1970, state laws across America got rid of the ban on work on Sundays. And as a young man at the time, I found it incredibly shocking, even disturbing, not because I was a particularly pious young man, but I just assumed America was a Christian country at the time. And to make Sunday a work day like Monday seemed to go against worship and against the notion of a day of rest. And a day where we pay homage to God. And so the demands, extraordinary, even hyperbolic demands are made for the sake of work, rather than for the sake of leisure. And leisure, as a famous Catholic author once put it, is the basis of culture, because leisure is not idleness. Leisure is the opportunity to engage in religious and cultural pursuits, including worship. So the transformation of society into a workaholic society goes contrary to cultural pursuits that depend on a healthy amount of leisure, if you will.
I try to understand liberalism and the idea of human life according to Christ, according to Christianity, that liberalism, in a way, if you try to realize that the individual can proceed if he has good companions.
Yes.
And one group can go ahead if looks for a win-win situation with other groups.
Yes.
And if you thinking over and over this situation, you make wider and wider the circle. Finally, you end up looking for a win-win situation with everyone.
Yeah.
And it is a special form of liberalism for you, or it's a possible dimension to develop liberalism to this direction?
Yes, I think so. I think so, because when you see liberalism and socialism and corporatism on a spectrum, then there's the possibility of transforming or moving society slowly in one direction or another. And so I'm speaking about liberalism, socialism, and corporatism in somewhat abstract and ideal terms, when in fact these socioeconomic theories are capable are somewhat plastic and capable of mutating or changing in one direction or another. And let me just say that going back to this idea that virtue stands in the middle, as you know from Aristotle's Ethics, the idea of virtue standing in the middle is that it stands between excess and defect. And in fact, socialism and liberalism are either excesses or defects of good things. And so liberalism stresses individualism, individuality, which in itself is a good thing and to be preserved, but exaggerates individualism into a possessive individualism, whereas socialism overemphasizes solidarity and collectivity. Solidarity is very important. You need both. You need a balance between individual freedom and solidarity. So they stress good things, but they undermine those good things by way of exaggeration, or as I put it, excess or defect. And if I may, people, apropos of this idea that liberalism and socialism are the two different faces of liberalism, or let's say perhaps a free market, capitalism is the other face of liberalism from socialism. Very few people realize that, for example, Adam Smith and Karl Marx really present to the modern age what I call a sibling rivalry, that they're members of the same family. And if you look at the things that Marx and Adam Smith stress, they're both stressing the goal of freedom, not a moral freedom, but a freedom to do as one pleases, according to one's fancy or will, and that is actually the goal of Marx as well. He wanted to emancipate the workers from oppression, the oppression of capital, so that they could lead free lives. And he accepted the critique of Rousseau against Locke, that while Locke stressed freedom and Rousseau stressed freedom, Locke, the father of liberal capitalism, Rousseau, the grandfather relative to Marx of liberal socialism. Rousseau made the point against Locke that you want freedom, I want freedom, but you can't have freedom with massive income inequality, because massive income inequality translates into power for the rich, and then the rich or the capitalists oppress labor and the poor. So in order to have freedom, you have to you have to create an egalitarian society. But they both, so Marx and capitalists, the Marxists and the capitalists, or the Marxists and Adam Smith, both have the same goal. It's a negative freedom, the freedom from oppression, the freedom to do as one pleases. They just have different means. And this point was made by, of all people, Ludwig von Mises of the Austrian school, who says that capitalists and socialists have the same end, material prosperity and freedom, but different means to that end. And so again, they are just two sides of the same coin, two different means to the same goal. And I might also emphasize that the capitalist, the liberal capitalist, would love to get rid of government. And that's exactly what Marx's ultimate vision involves. Most people think of Marxism in terms of Stalinism and authoritarian state and planned economy. That's not what Marx is about. Marx is about the recovery of a workers' paradise in which the whole world will be organized according to an international workers' cooperative without government. So, and the capitalist doesn't want government either. They're both anarchic. So they're both materialistic because they only look to material prosperity and economics. They both stress a non-Christian and an amoral freedom. So their main characteristics are almost identical. They just differ in the means to economic prosperity. And as I say, this is a problem for culture, because culture depends on leisure, and culture is interested in meta-economic goals, spiritual goals, religious goals, virtue, and the arts, the sciences, art, science, and religion. Not just these things subordinate to and suffocated by economics.
You write about the origin and the end of liberalism.
Yes.
In what way end of liberalism?
Yes. Well, the word in English, "end," has a double meaning. I mean, most words in languages have multiple meanings, but the end in English can either generally mean purpose or completion and failure. So I meant it in both terms. What is the purpose of origin is clear, but end both in terms of purpose and failure. And I believe that modern liberalism is ultimately a failed socioeconomic model, precisely because man is homo cultus and not homo economicus. Man is not fundamentally an economic being. He's partly an economic being. His whole constitution is not by nature meant to be dedicated to economic activity. He's primarily a cultural being. He's primarily a cultural being because he is a rational and speculative being, and therefore he is ultimately preoccupied with ultimate reality, and his theories of ultimate reality guide his life. Questions of ultimate reality transcend the pursuit of material prosperity and wealth.
What do you think? How wide is the conception that liberalism today is a failure?
Yes. What are the signs of its failure? Well, interestingly enough, a few years ago, the president of France, Sarkozy, and the chancellor of Germany both said, I don't know how much they believed or understood what they were saying, but both said that multiculturalism is failing Europe. And I think in general there is in the West a social malaise, a questioning of what unites a people, and is there anything more to life than the pursuit of matter, if you will. And I think we see. I think we see a general. We can speak not only of a degradation of the environment, but a degradation in morals and manners, a callousness toward life, be it the unborn or the born. And that has to be. Materialism will lead to a callousness toward life, and false expectations about the salvific power of technology. Technology will solve all our problems. And I think there's just a failure of the West in terms of its socio-economic world view to satisfy the cultural longings of mankind. And I think what we will see, and we are seeing now, is more cultural fragmentation. If I may, just a footnote to what I've been saying. And I've thought this for a long time, that when you take a classical Enlightenment state like America, the only thing that holds it together is economics. And you could see the fear on the faces of the economic elites in 2008 at the inception of the financial crisis. They knew that it was not just a question of a massive liquidity shortage, but the destabilizing social effects that an economic downward spiral would cause. And there's an interesting and instructive comparison between now in America and, say, the 1930s during the Great Depression. But even in the 1930s, America is a much more homogeneous or homogeneous society, and New York City had very little crime. Now, the liberals in the 1960s came up with this slogan that poverty equals crime. If you're poor, you commit crime. And so to solve the crime problem, we have to institute massive social welfare and entitlements, and then we'll have less crime. Well, in the 1930s, in New York City, and for that matter, the rest of the country, and I can speak from the experience of my own parents, who were young people in Brooklyn in the 1930s, everybody was poor. Everybody was poor, and there was no crime. No crime on the subway, little crime on the streets, because there was cultural and ethical coherence. Everybody went to church in those days, and now no one goes to church. So if you take away the economic glue of America now, you are back to Thomas Hobbes and the war of all against all, because there is no sense of cultural unity, sharing the same belief system, and helping each other. People of a culturally unified state are more likely, sociologically speaking, to share and to help each other, when, as opposed to a society in which everybody holds radically different beliefs. And I just would add a footnote to that. We are faced, nonetheless, with the problem of de facto pluralism. And how in a culturally unified state, which I think is a healthier state, how do we deal with minorities of one cultural or ethical or even racial situation of one sort or another, and by offering a suite of robust civil rights that protect minorities. But minorities within a dominant culture would have to respect the sensibilities of that dominant culture on the basis of the ancient adage, when in Rome, do as the Romans.
Yeah, if liberalism fragments the culture.
Fragments the culture, yes.
It means that it fragments the society itself.
Yes.
So if there is a society like Hungary coming out from communism,
yes,
where the fragmentation is a very painful reality.
Yes.
Liberalism could not be an answer in no way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, not to anticipate the rest of your question, but a thought comes to mind. This is another strategy of liberalism, to create a more atomistic society, a more individualistic society, and therefore a more consumerist society, and that is political fragmentation with multiple party systems, and the West is in a state of political confusion because of the proliferation of political parties, and I think the wonder of the new Hungarian constitution is, while it hasn't done away with political parties, it has tried to establish a foundational value system, so that political parties theoretically should not be arguing about fundamental values, but about policy. You know, what's the best way? How many bridges should we build on the Danube, and in what style? And having companies, you know, bid for the work. They should be discussing policy, not basic values. If you're discussing basic values, you don't have a country. So I think what the West, and this is going to take some time, and I don't believe in revolution. I believe in transition, and I think the West needs to make a transition to nonpartisan government. It needs, as far as possible, to get rid of government. And one way, not get rid of government, pardon me, but get rid of deeply conflicted party system. And one way it can do that is through broadband or the internet. You can have voters in regencies, provinces, and cities vote for nonpartisan candidates who first, let's say, vetted by impartial boards of justice to see who's qualified or not, say in terms of education, knowledge of the Constitution, and a fundamental commitment to the Constitution and its fundamental values. And then once a candidate is considered qualified, put his curriculum vitae or resume up on the internet, as well as his platform, and let people vote for candidates on the basis of merit and knowledge, rather than along party lines.
If I take your sentence concerning that if there is no unity in basic values, there is no state. Let's go back to the United States.
Thank you for summarizing my
let's go back to the United States.
Perfectly. Yeah.
From with this sentence, if you look on the United States,
yeah,
is there a country there?
I don't think so in a classical sense, because the classical notion of country has to be one based on, and that's a very good question. I don't believe that America is a country in a classical sense. It's a country in a modern and liberal sense. Again, the basis of its unity is economics, but a country. Qua country really has to have agreement on fundamental values, and that's why I think the financial crisis of 2008 was so frightening, because again, once that economic glue came apart, what's left? What's left? Not much. And a country always needs to fall back, if you will, on its cultural resources. And I think my idea of a neo-corporatist polity would be one. It would respect the market. But the market would be a means, not an end, and therefore society would be based on a more organic structure rather than a mechanical structure of competing interests, conflicting and competing interests, accidentally moving toward equilibrium. Whereas in an organic model, and this is where neo-corporatism what neo-corporatism shares with the old corporatism, the model of society is not the mechanical model, which is merely an aggregation of interests, but an organic model, the model of a body, where the organs of society, the associations within society based on professional interests or concerns, or cultural interests or concerns, or whatever the body, whatever the organ might be, they are in, according to the neo-corporatist organic model, the organs of society cooperate for the good of the whole, rather than understand each other as in competition or conflicting. To go back to St. Paul in 1 Corinthians 12, where he understands Christian society as a body, and implicitly attacks the modern mechanical notion of society when he says it would be absurd, and I'm paraphrasing, it would be absurd for the head to say to the feet, I am against you and I don't need you, or for the eye to say to the hand, I am against you, I don't need you. Again, in a nutshell, the corporate society works on the basis more on competition, works more on the basis of cooperation rather than competition. And interestingly, Karl Marx is a product, again, of the Enlightenment liberal notion of the mechanical or Newtonian state, because he presupposes that mechanical state, as you know, because of his idea of class conflict. It is precisely the liberal state that, for Karl Marx, that will turn into the communist state because of its internal and conflictual contradictions.
You know the sentence that a poison in a small amount could be a medicine. Liberalism kills the unity of values, the culture.
Yes.
I just think on the ideas are always not static, but developing or just dying away. Yes. Liberalism, if it goes on its way, the results could be really devastating. And what the United States shows today, it's like the results, we are facing with the results of liberalism, which is developing, destroying the social fabric of, of the states.
Yes. Yes. Through I would say through possessive individualism, and we have a constantly growing income inequality that was very different from the time of my parents. Yes, at the end of the 19th century, before my parents were born, you had a handful of massively wealthy people at the end of the 19th century in America who would make the likes of Bill Gates seem almost middle class, and I'm speaking of the Vanderbilts and Carnegie and the Astors and others who had tremendous control of the socioeconomic situation, and there was a tremendous income inequality. That was narrowed in the early 20th century through a slew of social policies, what we would call social welfare. But now it's back on the march again, income inequality, and we have terrible disproportion between the upper levels of income and the lower levels, and we're building up to, ironically, class conflict in that regard, and that's one of the aspects of neo-corporatism. It would be, as far as economics or income, it would be much more equalitarian, but not egalitarian, and would allow for differences in wealth, but not huge differences in wealth, which clearly, logically imply fragmentation of society, and income equality or greater income equality has tremendous benefits, especially for culture, because it has been sociologically shown that people are healthier, happier, have greater life expectancy. There's much greater sharing and cooperation in more economically equal societies. Less stress on the environment. Less emphasis on feverish consumption, and a more coherent and unified society. And this has been known for centuries. It goes back to Aristotle, who says in his work on politics that the best practical society is a middle-class polity. Is a middle-class polity. Now, when he meant middle class, he didn't mean so much a commercial middle class, but a hoplite middle class. So the basis, the backbone of your society for Aristotle was the man who could afford a full suit of armor, and as opposed to the wealthy man who could have horses and therefore participate or be part of the cavalry. But so Aristotle stressed the importance of a large and relatively equal socioeconomic basis for society. The death knell of a society is growing opposition between the wealthy and the poor.
We can go on and on with this topic, and a lot of questions are still, but time is passing. We sit here now in Budapest.
Yes.
This is the first time that you are here. You arrived with a lot of knowledges about Hungary, about informations about the country. Now you are here since 1 week.
Yes.
Almost 1 week.
Yes, almost 1 week.
What are your impressions? And
well, I am, again, first time in Budapest, and without a lot of previous knowledge, secondhand knowledge about the city. And my impression is what a grand and vibrant and robust urban life Budapest enjoys, and a confidence in its past, a sense in which its past is the future, and that is, of course, the formula for every great tradition. Any country that has a rich tradition like Hungary is constantly drawing on the resources of that tradition. And I have to say, I admired I admire Budapest for its classical appearance. It's a beautiful city. It's keeping in check certain aspects, if you will, of modern architecture, for example. It's not, I gather, trying to look like the New York City skyline, which, alas, London is more and more trying to look like New York City. And why it's trying to look like New York City, I don't know. You'll have to ask the English. But the citizens of Budapest are interested in preserving their Christian and classical heritage and keeping, how should I put it, the distorted geometry and or abstract self-expression within certain limits. I was looking at the neo-Gothic Parliament the other day, and turned toward my left, and had noticed a building across from the south side of the Parliament that was completely out of keeping with the classical architectural expression of the plaza. And appearance is important. That you maintain a beautiful, a decorous city. And I think that's what will attract people to Hungary and Budapest.
If someone reads the newspapers, the magazines about Hungary, listens to radio or television in the States, has an idea about the country which is nearly like the Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
And your experiences here, freely moving, coming, going, walking on the streets, what can you tell about this image which was constructed about the country outside?
Yeah, it's completely false and hyperbolic. You have certain well-known, if not notorious, liberals in America and in the West who see Hungary as an authoritarian state. Well, you can't have an authoritarian state when you have multiple parties and a very active democracy. Of course, what they consider authoritarian is this effort to establish constitutionally a basic or fundamental national value system. They don't want that. They want their liberal value system to be imposed, and that's what liberalism does. At least the liberalism of capitalist, if you will, capitalist socio-economic theory. It pretends not to have a notion of the human good, because it says it's leaving the notion of the good up to the utility of every individual. But that becomes a surreptitious notion of the common good, that the good is essentially individual and subjective, rather than social, objective, and grounded in a universal human nature. So liberalism pretends not to be imposing a universal or common good, when in fact it does. It only denies that it does.
Dear Richard, thank you very much for this discussion.
Thank you very much for having me.
Gunusum.